We will absolutely do the Titanic. So in case you haven't figured it out, this is a King Trout video. And it's King Trout saying that the Titanic was sunk to create the Federal Reserve. So, let's take a look.
The year is 1912. The world's wealthiest elite are dining on caviar and oysters while discussing oil futures, railroad monopolies, and which brand of cigar pairs best with unfathomable amounts of inherited power. All aboard a ship being hailed as mankind's greatest feat of engineering, a floating palace so luxurious it made Versailles look like a Motel 6. The Titanic. But below deck, far beyond the Art Deco wallpaper, chandeliers the size of small cars and doors that are apparently too small to fit 2 people on.
God, this. Yeah. The funny thing is I think James Cameron actually did his own experiments to prove that he did his own experiments claiming that if Jack had tried to climb up onto the door, it would have sunk them both. And he's like, there's no way Jack could have climbed up onto that door.
2 people on them, something nefarious is going on. Not just in the boiler rooms, but in the boardrooms. Because according to one theory, the Titanic wasn't sunk on accident by an iceberg. It was sunk on purpose by a banker. And not just any banker, J.P. Morgan. I'm King Trout, and no, honey, don't worry, the blinking red light means it's off. Join me today as we discuss one fishy theory discussing the sinking of the HMS Titanic. Just before and during the turn of the 20th century, J.P. Morgan was Wall Street's apex predator. He was America's mustache-twirling, railroad-owning, government-bailing-out robber baron. And maybe, just maybe, a man.
Titanic is a horror movie. If you're a man.
Why? Because Jack died? Is that why it's considered a horror movie? Because Jack ends up dying? Yeah. Yeah, you're referring to basically the women and children first, for the escape. Okay, I see what you're saying there. I get what you're saying. I'm debating on whether it should be considered a horror movie. It's, it's a horrific death. Sure, absolutely. I don't know if the Titanic would be considered a horror movie, per se.
Who orchestrated one of the deadliest mass murders in the 20th century, all to reshape the global financial system. Let's meet our villain. John Pierpont Morgan wasn't just a rich guy with a stupid-ass middle name. Oh no, he was a rich guy other rich guys went to when their empires were collapsing. When the US economy nearly collapsed during the Panic of 1907, it wasn't the government that saved it. It was J.P. Morgan. He essentially acted as a one-man Federal Reserve before there even was one. And that's where the problem begins. Morgan was a firm believer in centralized banking. He wanted a national reserve that could control money supply, inflation rates, and prevent bank runs. Because if Morgan was going to control the country, he needed to control its money first. But here's the kicker.
Right.
Not everyone agreed with him. Some wealthy power brokers wanted the banking system to stay decentralized and to remain on the gold standard. Among them, some very important men who had first-class tickets on the doomed luxury liner. Let's talk about 3 names that always come up in Titanic conspiracy circles. 1. Benjamin Guggenheim, industrialist, heir to a mining fortune. He funded Tesla back when everybody called him crazy for it. No, not that one, the other one. And allegedly an opponent to centralized banking. 2. Isidor Straus, co-owner of Macy's, former congressman, and again, no fan of the Federal Reserve. And 3. John Jacob Astor IV, one of the wealthiest men in the world at the time, and again, an opponent of the Federal Reserve Act. All 3 men died on the Titanic, and all 3 were opponents of J.P. Morgan, both financially and ideologically. And all 3 could have thrown serious wrenches into the establishment of the Federal Reserve Act. Now ask yourself, what are the odds that these 3 men, all titans of industry and opponents of the Federal Reserve, just so happened to be on this ship that sank, while the one man, their strongest opponent, coincidentally, was not? Well, about that. Here's where things get weird. The man who stood to benefit the most from their deaths, J.P. Morgan, was also supposed to be on the Titanic. He even had his own suite. His luggage was on board, his top hats were in the closet. The press even announced his attendance. But then at the last minute, like hours before, he announced that he would not be departing. Morgan pulled out at the last minute, citing illness or urgent business. But guess what? Days later, witnesses spotted him enjoying a leisurely stay at a resort in Aix-les-Bains, France.
Wait, but
Enjoying
that
a leisurely
said,
stay at a resort in...
it said he died shortly after the disaster in 1913. So, I mean, it's not like he lived all that long after escalating death on the Titanic. He died shortly after.
But guess what? Days later, witnesses spotted him enjoying a leisurely stay at a resort in Aix-les-Bains, France. Perfectly healthy, puffing on cigars as if nothing were wrong. He looked like a man who didn't just dodge an iceberg, but he'd planned on it. Even his friends raised eyebrows. And when you're so suspicious that even Gilded Age robber barons think it's a bit shady, it says a lot. April 10th, Titanic departs Southampton. Aboard, 2,200 passengers. A veritable floating social ladder. But beneath the silverware and champagne bubbles, things were off. The ship only had 20 lifeboats, even though it was designed for 64. The excuse? It was too cluttered. Aesthetics over survival. And then there was the lifeboat drill.
I'd also suggest thank Exia, thank you for the tier 1. Wait. Is it a prime or tier 1? My activity says tier 1. Anyway, thank you. It's... I think it was also the hubris because the Titanic was supposed to be unsinkable. And so I do think that maybe there was aesthetics involved there, but I think that was also in conjunction with the notion that the Titanic was supposed to be quote unquote unsinkable. And so maybe just as a matter of course, they had 16 lifeboats on there just in case. But it was, effectively speaking, sheer fucking hubris and not wanting to unpretty up the deck that they had fewer lifeboats. My guess is there was probably, like, by law, they had to have lifeboats. So it's, I think if they could have gotten away with it, they might have gone with 0 lifeboats because they were so confident that the Titanic could not possibly sink. But I'm guessing maybe back then there was a law that said you had to have lifeboats. And so they threw 16 lifeboats on there just to comply with the law. But that was it, because they didn't think nothing could happen to the Titanic. That would be my suspicion. Yeah, well, no, Tanito, no, I'm not talking about, like, being well known to the passengers. I'm referring to the people that built the Titanic and outfitted the Titanic, specifically with the lifeboats. By the time Standard 16 was actually by that time, the Standard 16 was actually more than legal requirement. There you go. So they basically want the legal requirement. The people who designed and built the Titanic considered it unsinkable. So they want the legal requirement, nothing more, to basically not, so it would look pretty. And, it would look pretty and attractive because this was all about catering to the wealthy. That was the whole purpose of the Titanic. As Trout was pointing out, and as we all know, it was a boat for the wealthy to just go on board and have a great time and show off their wealth. They didn't think that was it. That was it.
Scheduled for the morning of April 14th, the morning the Titanic sunk, it was canceled at the last minute. No explanation was given for this cancellation, almost as if they conveniently didn't want people to be prepared. Later that evening, the Titanic sailed directly into an iceberg field. Not in a cute metaphorical way, I mean they literally sailed into a field of icebergs. They received warning after warning. At 9 a.m. from the Caronia, at 1:42 p.m. the Baltic, at 7:15 p.m. the Californian, at 9:40 p.m. the Mesaba, which they completely ignored, and at 10:55 p.m., The Californian attempted to warn them again, to which the Titanic told them to shut up. Captain Ed-
It's just something I've heard before, is that supposedly the Titanic could have avoided the icebergs, that they did get multiple warnings like this, and the Titanic chose to ignore all of them. Yeah, I've heard this. I've heard before about it.
Edward Smith, he kept going. Full speed, no deviation, no slowing down. At 11:40 p.m., the Titanic strikes an iceberg, peeling the hull open like a tin can. Panic follows. Lifeboats are launched half full. Crew miscommunication runs rampant. First-class passengers are told to remain calm. Don't worry, everything's fine. By 2:20 a.m., Titanic sinks beneath the waves. Astor, Guggenheim, Strauss, all dead. 1,500 souls lost. Meanwhile, some of Morgan's business associates, they happened to survive. Others who had planned to go, cancel. And what about the Californian, the ship closest to Titanic? It ignored the flares. The wireless operator, conveniently off duty. The communication systems experienced multiple malfunctions over the course of the sinking. Communication systems which had been funded by our boy, J.P. Morgan. Let's turn the conspiracy up a notch. There's a theory that, and bear with me through this one, the ship that sank wasn't actually the Titanic at all. It was a different ship. The Titanic's nearly identical.
The Titanic did have a twin ship. There was a twin sister ship in... Was it ported in France? Yeah, I think it was the Olympic, Chris. Yeah, I do remember that. You're saying that there were three, Canito. Okay, so the Britannia and the Lusitania, or the Olympic and the Britannic. Okay. So I do know that it did have, like, sister ships.
It wasn't actually the Titanic at all. It was a different ship. The Titanic's nearly identical sister ship, the Olympic. Why? The Olympic had been damaged earlier in a crash with the Royal Naval warship, the HMS Hawke. The damage was severe, and the ship was deemed financially unviable. Both the Olympic and the Titanic were owned by the White Star Line, which was in turn owned by the International Mercantile Marine Company. You want to guess who owned the International Mercantile Marine Company?
Yeah.
J.P. Morgan. And after the Olympics crash with the Hawke, he stood to lose a fortune. Due to the damage caused during the collision, the Olympic was deemed uninsurable. So the theory goes that they switched the ships. They disguised the Olympic as the Titanic, filled it up with coal, passengers, and a few inconvenient millionaires, and then sent it out to sea, knowing full well it would not return. Insane? Maybe. But if you were a robber baron and...
So he was talking about that that it was the Olympic that sailed, not the Titanic in the first place, from ports. Okay, and that okay. Kalunga, you probably know it as J.P. Morgan Chase, the bank. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So basically, they took the Olympic, they redid they repainted it to be the Titanic, put Titanic themed or branded stuff on the interior, and it set sail, and it didn't actually hit an iceberg. It was just so severely damaged already, and they didn't tell the passengers about it, that it just failed and sank, and then it was blamed on an iceberg. Interesting. That's a theory I haven't heard before. That's certainly a theory that I have not heard of before.
1912, who controlled banks, shipping lines, newspapers, and politicians. Is it really unreasonable to do something like that? He was arguably one of the most powerful men in the world at the time. A few shipyard workers claimed to see inconsistencies on the so-called Titanic. Porthole placement, deck layouts, and screw configurations. Now, opponents to this theory state that the insurance claim would have resulted in a loss for the White Star Line. The insurance payout for the Titanic was $5,019,12, but the Titanic cost $7.5,019,12 to build. And to that I will counter, a 67% return is better than a 0% return, and were Morgan's intentions to get rid of these three opponents of his, being as he was one of the wealthiest people in the world at the time, I don't think $2.5 million is really an unreasonable fee to make that happen. Just saying.
Fair.
Now for some
Fair
logistics.
point.
Multiple Titanic researchers agree that a coal fire was raging in one of the ship's bunkers before it even set sail. Firemen aboard the ship were ordered to keep the fire secret, and photos of the Titanic before it set sail show a massive black smudge right where the iceberg supposedly hit. So here's the theory. The coal fire weakened the hull. The iceberg was just the coup de grace. An insurance scam turned into a mass casualty event, and the timing was just too perfect. Hell, maybe the iceberg was legitimately an accident on top of the coal fire. I don't know. Either way, the ship sank. Morgan's top 3 rivals are dead, and less than a year later, on December 23rd, 1913, the Federal Reserve Act passed. It creates a centralized banking system which can manipulate interest rates, issue currency, and stabilize the economy. Exactly what J.P. Morgan wanted. With his ideological opponents at the bottom of the North Atlantic, the road was clear. The Fed
And then he died. Because he died in 1913. So right after the act passed, he kicked the bucket.
becomes the most powerful institution in America. It controls inflation, dictates recessions, and is accountable
True,
to
Garrett.
no one
His
but
state would
itself.
benefit.
It's like giving your bookie control of the national treasury. And wouldn't you know it, all this happened just in time for World War I, the Great War. This was a time when it would prove very convenient to be able to print money on demand. Coincidence? Maybe. But when coincidences start to stack this high, they almost start to look like blueprints. Morgan skips the voyage, anti-Fed bankers die, the Olympic is quietly retired, and America enters an era where a handful of private banks quietly control the nation's currency. Even Thomas Jefferson warned of something like this happening all the way back in 1816 in a letter to John Taylor. And I sincerely believe with you that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies, and that the principle of spending money to be paid by posterity under the name of funding is but swindling futurity on a large scale. Let's do the post-game analysis. J.P. Morgan. He avoided financial catastrophe and took control of the United States economy. The Federal Reserve. It became the shadow government's piggy bank that exists to this day. And insurance companies. They paid out big but dodged lawsuits thanks to loopholes in maritime law. The losers. Guggenheim, Astor, and Strauss, because they're all dead. The White Star Line, because it was eventually absorbed by competitors. And everyone who believed the Titanic was unsinkable, because they look like stupid wee-wee-head idiots. History is written by the survivors, especially when they own the publishing companies. All right, let's play devil's advocate for a second, though. The Titanic really did hit an iceberg. I mean, there's a lot of evidence for that. Maybe Morgan actually canceled his trip due to health reasons. He was 75 years old and had severe rosacea. He also did die within a year of the Titanic sinking and 9 months before the passing of the Federal Reserve Act. But that's not to say that he predicted his own death. I mean, obviously, had he the intention of living forever, he would have been very thrilled with the results. And Astor, Guggenheim, and Strauss weren't all explicitly against the creation of the Fed. It's just kind of implied from their behavior. And there's some claims that Strauss was actually in favor of creation of the Fed. The Olympic switch theory also has some logistical problems. Primarily, that were the switch to have taken place, hundreds of crew members would have had to have kept that a secret. I mean, if
and you're, as the saying goes, when you have that many people involved in a secret, it's not staying secret. A secret only stays secret if one person knows about it. The instant you involve more than one person in any secret, it's not staying a secret. That's just facts.
If they even knew in the first place, you know. And all of those are valid counterpoints, but conspiracy theories aren't built necessarily on the evidence that's available to us, especially when those in charge of disseminating it have something to gain. They're built on
And actually, to your point, that's the whole point. That's the whole thing behind conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories, they are viewed as highly unlikely, but there's just enough. I'm not going to say evidence because it's not actually evidence to substantiate it, but there's just enough, like, pinpoint specific facts that occur in any said incident to, you know, especially with taken perhaps slightly out of context, that the human imagination can basically take those tiny little, tiny little instances, those tiny little facts, and they can contort the surrounding facts to say, well, this could happen because this specific tiny thing happened, or this specific tiny thing happened. And yeah, there's just enough facts in amongst other facts for you to go, for your brain to cook up something and to go, well, it's possible this could happen if all of these were ignored, and you take this singular thing into account, and then this kind of, if this possible thing happened, because maybe there's not fully substantiated facts surrounding this part of the incident, and so you could say that this potentially could have happened, which is something that is potentially rooted in reality, and your brain goes, well, this could have happened because realistically speaking, it is entirely possible this could have happened. And very often, conspiracy theories are more fun than the reality. The reality, in the case of the Titanic, the reality that it struck an iceberg because the ship's crew, and particularly the captain, fucked up. They hit an iceberg, it sank, and a lot of people lost their lives. Tragic story, to be sure, overarchingly boring. Now you take everything that Trout has been talking about in this video, which tangentially are kind of factual, like with the Olympic having damage, that there was a fire, that there was a fire below deck, you could see the smudge from the fire, that you have JP Morgan and all of these other bankers that were around at that time, that the Fed was, the timing of the Fed passing. You have all of these lateral events that are occurring in, around this time. And it's fun to come up with the idea that these things that didn't actually directly contribute to the Titanic sinking could have tangentially contributed to it if we basically laid down this roadmap that connects these things to it. So it's fun. It's fun to do. But the reality is that the likelihood of it actually taking place like that is slim to none.
Patterns, coincidences, and power imbalances that make you question whether the truth is what we are told it is. And when the guy who stands to gain the most from the disaster also happens to be the guy who controls the means of communication, investigation, recovery, and literally owns the fucking ship, it's entirely reasonable to ask some follow-up questions. So, did JP Morgan orchestrate the deadliest maritime disaster in peacetime history just to orchestrate the implementation of the Federal Reserve? Well, there's
Exactly, Atanashi. When you hear hoofbeats, you think horses, not zebras. It's true for medicine, and it's true for investigations as well.
There's no smoking gun, no signed confession, and no 1912 CCTV footage with, a minute missing for some fucking reason. But there is opportunity, there is means, and there is a long, dark history of powerful people making problems go away when they stand to gain something. At the end of the day, the Titanic was more than a ship. It was a symbol of hubris, of inequality, and of the systems that always seem to fail when we need them most. And maybe, just maybe, it was the sacrificial lamb to America's new financial god, the Federal Reserve. As always, I've been King Trout. Thank you for watching. I'll see you when I see you. Bye.
Like Trout's new setup, too. Glad to see Trout was able to get his setup out of the kitchen and into the attic. Well, no kid. Atanashi, Trout doesn't like the government, period. Okay? Trout has a problem with the government as a whole. All right. Chat. We have time for one more. And I know exactly which one we're going to do. Well, I mean, Kevin, he had a very nice kitchen, but realistically speaking, it's not professional. It is better for him to be in a professional studio.